We're glad to be here today at the culminating event of our memoir writing class. And so we're going to have some of our students read some of their memoirs. And this class was made possible through E.A. Mickelson Philanthropy, that's formerly the Aroha, that has meant so much to us through the last 3 years with our classes. So thank them and let them know how much we appreciate what they're doing for us. And I think, Don, you're going to be first, right?
Yes.
Take it away.
My story is called Memories. Memories. How do you pick one that's most important, most memorable, and most dear to your heart? Is it the first time I kissed a girl? 9 years old in Lehman's Trailer Park in Bensenville. Myself, Danny Tananico, and Wanda Green swapped spit behind a fence. She was an older woman of about 12. Was that when I learned to, or was it when I learned to drive? Or was it when I left home for the first time on a job pretending to be an adult? In the summer of 1973, fresh out of high school, I was hired on as a Mississippi riverboat deckhand. I was 8 years with 3 years experience as a grocery store bagger and stocker when I found myself on an airplane. It was my first time to fly, winging my way to Minneapolis, Minnesota. I got the job by knowing a woman named Charlene whose husband was a boat captain. We worked together at Big Star. I sacked groceries and she ran a register. I traveled to Mississippi for a month from Minneapolis, St. Paul to St. Louis, Missouri. Diesels throbbing, I walked the narrow gangways of 150-foot-long steel barges. Empty of grain, they floated high, probably 8 feet out of the water. Loaded, the river was right there at your feet. I worked 6-hour shifts, 24 hours a day. We had to. It was hard work making and breaking tow. At night, the big 3-foot arc light on the top of the wheelhouse swept the night for a mile down the river. I walked the decks of the barges on muggy Mississippi River nights, the air thick with humidity, insects fogging around my light as any light they could find. I can't see. I was alone with a flashlight, flipping open hatches to make sure our 300 feet of barges weren't sinking. In the morning, I'd have to clean the galley, then take a push broom to the top of the wheelhouse and sweep away the foot-thick layer of mayflies around the searchlight in the top of the wheelhouse. Every day was the same, making tow, putting together barges for the trip from Minneapolis to St. Louis, breaking tow at every lock. We sweated in the hot sun, the smell of the river and diesel around us, carrying steel pelican hooks and cables, separating barges and pushing them through the lock 2 at a time. We'd ride the river in the lock like an elevator as we traveled downriver, the locks dropping the water sometimes as much as 50 feet or more at a time. When it reached the water level on the downriver side, the gates would swing open. We'd push the barges out, the throb of the boat's twin engines filling the concrete channel as the captain eased the boat out into the river. Once out, we would go to the riverbank, unhook the barges from the boat, and leave them tied off to a tree. Then we would sail back into the lock, do the entire process in reverse, and retrieve the rest of our tow, 2 barges at a time. It usually took about 8 hours. For years, when I'd stop at a gas station on a hot summer night and hear the semi-truck engines in the hot summer night, I'd flash back to my time on the river. But really, is that the most memorable of all? 18 years ago, something happened that had never happened before. My first granddaughter was born. My daughter was having a problem pregnancy and ended up going into labor early. We rushed to the hospital, worry gnawing at us. They had given her some shots, one to stop labor and one to help the baby's lungs develop. Then on the second day, Reagan came. She was tiny, born at 32 weeks, 3 pounds and 13 ounces, all sorts of tubes hanging out of her, but she was beautiful. When I finally got to pick her up, I cradled this tiny human in the palms of my hands and cried. She was soft and scratchy where the tape held the tube, and she smelled like medicine. I cried because in that instance, I realized why I had lived as long as I did. I had 2 children, my daughter and a son. Both were difficult births, but somehow this was different. And sitting here now, I still find it hard to articulate that difference. She's about 18 now, and I don't see her much, but I still have that day in the nursery.
story is entitled Ollie Gillard. She was a Gillard. I was not. We were not friends. She was always busy and did not resent her work, but she never sang. She seldom smiled, but her laughter was contagious. She loved her family and cared for all their needs, yet she never said, "I love you." Even in the worst of times, her family never went hungry. She cooked 3 big meals a day. In good seasons, she canned 500 quarts of vegetables and about 100 pints of jelly. Her gardens were truck patches, and her family ate fresh vegetables all spring and summer. She was bashful in new situations. She could be stubborn in the Gillard tradition when she wanted to be, and she mostly got her way in the end. She was loved and adored by her husband, children, and whole Gillard clan. Young people loved her. She would plan parties for them and supervise their games. Young married girls came often to sit on her front porch. She was revered by them as a wise, kind counselor. She often went to new mothers when she was sent for. It was amazing to see her lift the screaming baby into her arms, snuggle them in, and rock them to sleep. She only had words of encouragement for the mother. When the mother again felt at wit's end, she did not hesitate to send for Ollie or bring those crying babies to her front step. Old people sent for her when their garden produce was ready, but they had no strength to preserve it. She was quick and efficient with the work, but when she left, they often marveled at what a wonderful visit they had with Ollie. I loved this woman, but we were not friends until the most wonderful thing happened when I was 10 years old. I had learned in school that the way people sometimes talk was not proper English. And the teacher gave an example. My mother said that. I thought about it all day long and decided I had to tell Ollie. I decided to broach the subject when she was making biscuits. I was afraid she would be mad. She did stop with her hands in the dough, looked at me, and I whispered, "I will teach you if you want me to, and it will be our secret." She said, "That sounds wonderful." Then she finished making the biscuits. Through my years in school, I would always share what I was learning, and she was an excellent student. But that first day, with Mama's left hand in the biscuit dough, was when my friendship with Ollie Gillard Smith, my mother, began. And oh, what a friendship it was.
Mama's kitchen table had her Bible and, of course, her Sunday school book, the New Albany Gazette, and other things I can't quite remember. The one thing that everyone in the family remembers is the cream-colored wind-up clock with the brass trim. You see, Mama had 2 clocks in the kitchen. One was for hanging on the wall over the table, and one was actually on the table. The one on the wall was for whatever the current time was, and the one on the table was for old time. If you asked her what time it was, she would say, "It's 2, but it's really 1. Every day we would listen to WNAU radio station on the little orange radio that she more than likely bought with green stamps. We only listened to Southern gospel music, preaching, and the hospital report. They would call out your name and tell what room you were in and when you were expected to go home. Mama didn't leave the radio on for long because she considered it a racket. The peace and quiet in her house is something that people miss, but they don't realize it. It was very peaceful being around her. During the day, the main sound was the inevitable ticking of the clock. At night, the window was cracked and we would hear the cars traveling down 78 Highway and the big trucks shifting gears as they strained going up the on-ramp. The sweet smell of earth and warm air would mingle with the musty smell of an old house. On nights that I couldn't fall asleep, Mama would say, "Close your eyes and listen to the toad frogs and crickets." To this day, I love the sound of a highway in the distance and frogs. That was short and sweet. There you go.
My article is entitled Photographing the Past. Architecture, as well as photography, has always been a love of mine. On this trip to the southwestern portion of my state, I was first in search of the historical ruins of the antebellum home in Windsor, located near Port Gibson, Mississippi. When I turned into the driveway of this once glorious mansion with only columns remaining, I was in awe. The view surpassed anything I had imagined. My camera and I were very busy that afternoon taking pictures. The amazing ornate columns told a story of a glorious past reduced to rubble. Amazingly enough, this house actually survived the dreaded Civil War, only to burn at a later date, supposedly because of a careless house guest with a cigarette. Now, next we were on to the ghost town of Rodney. We had been given directions, but after a few miles, we were not sure that we were on the right road. There was one other vehicle on this road, and somehow we managed to flag him down. He assured us that we were on the right road and we could continue to follow him since he lived in Rodney. I still vividly remember this small acreage of soil that had once been a bustling, busy town located on the Mississippi River. This town had very nearly been our state capital, was now almost abandoned, save for a few abandoned buildings and 2 churches that desperately needed some tender, loving care and probably lots of money. Time had not been kind to Rodney. The Civil War and subsequent yellow fever epidemic had devastated this town, with the final straw being an earthquake that changed the flow of the Mississippi River. No longer located on the mighty river, Rodney continued its decline. The churches were my favorite. I thought of the services that had been there over the years and the people that had graced its doors. The final stop on our trip was the town of Natchez. I had hit the architectural jackpot. So many beautiful homes from all periods of time, but especially antebellum and Victorian. Probably more were antebellum, and I was able to find out that the grander homes were owned by various garden clubs. Probably the 2 most famous houses were Stanton Hall and Longwood. Longwood was my favorite. It was an octagonal, 8-sided home, started before the Civil War, never to be finished. The workers left at the start of the war to return to their homes and never to come back. The home was being built by Howard Nutt, originally from Rodney. He died during the war, leaving his wife to move into the completed basement of Longwood along with their 10 children. This will forever be a testament to the resilience of Southern women. The family survived, but the mansion was never to be finished. We visit Natchez from time to time, and I always find something new that I hadn't discovered before.
My story is called Friends Don't End at 3 o'clock. They say that the people you work with become your family. I don't know who said that, but I learned it by example, and I hope my daughters will as well. My work friends know more about me than my real family will ever know. Our ages span over 3 decades, and we come from different towns and backgrounds. Together, we have given birth, cared for and buried parents, seen children succumb to drugs and be incarcerated, survived divorces, raised up and married off children, gone through heartbreak and joy, all while continuing to teach, love children, plan pep rallies and art shows, administer testing, and survive new administration every few years. Though I am now retired, these women will always be family. In August of 1970, the Aberdeen, Mississippi school system underwent full integration. For the veteran teachers, they would be going from classrooms of either all black or all white students with matching teachers and administration. For first-year teachers like my mother, they were entering a school that looked nothing like their own education, college included, had been to date. No one ever had been through anything like this before. It was forced by the United States Supreme Court. It was fought by the Deep South, including most of the whites who were being forced to do so. During this inaugural year of integration, 4 women at the newly named Shivers Junior High School would become the most unlikely of friends. 3 African-American veteran teachers would take in a white, 23-year-old recent college graduate. A local girl, mother was newly married, and the mother to 1-year-old me. These 3, who took her under their experienced wings, would play vital roles in the lives of my mother, myself, and eventually my own 2 daughters. Item A. I remember riding with mother to visit Mrs. Henley. About once a month, we would drive through the poorest part of town, right past the housing projects, and on the left was the only single dwelling house on the street. The 2 friends taught together only 1 year in 1970. It was mother's first and Mrs. Henley's last year to teach. Ida Mae Henley spent her entire teaching career, except the last year, at the School for African American Students. After integration, Aberdeen Colored School became Shivers Junior High, and it was located right in the middle of government housing projects. I would eventually attend 8th and 9th grades there, but I truly spent most of my childhood there as a teacher's kid. Mrs. Henley was a graceful, soft-spoken, beautiful widow with no children of her own. The 1 year she taught with my mom at school, she became her mentor and a mother-like figure. They had a loving, quiet, and respectful relationship, very different from the one mother had with her own mom. To me and my younger sister, Mrs. Henley felt more like a grandmother than our real one. After Mrs. Henley's retirement, we frequently went to visit her. Though her home was small and old, everything inside felt fancy and formal. The living room sofas were neatly covered with African blankets, and rugs made paths on the hardwood floors. Delicate porcelain figurines, a bunch of glass grapes, and a dish of ribbon candy could be found on the coffee table. A gas heater on the wall was turned up to hot orange year-round, which guaranteed that all of the ribbon candy would be stuck together. Mrs. Henley never failed to send us each a box of Millionaire's candy from the local drugstore for Valentine's. The luxurious treats were so beautifully packaged that my sister wouldn't open her box for months. At birthdays and Christmas, we received the most intricately crafted pop-up books one could ever imagine, each one signed and dated in perfect penmanship. Inside the cover, the occasion was noted. Christmas 1975, love, Miss Ida Mae Henley. Minnie. The fanciest person I ever knew was a substitute teacher at Shivers Junior High School. The school was named after her deceased first husband, who had been the principal of the Aberdeen Colored School for decades. Mrs. Minnie Shivers White drove a brand new Cadillac, wore full-length mink coats and Kentucky Derby-worthy hats, and that was just what she wore to work. Though she remarried a funeral home owner named Mr. White, she would always be called Mrs. Shivers, which no one dared to argue. On special occasions, my sister and I would receive ornate Hallmark cards with a check inside. Beautifully inscribed, they would read, "With love, Mrs. Minnie Shivers White." Not a warm and fuzzy grandmother type to probably even her own grandchildren, Mrs. Shivers always seemed to be helping mother out with one thing or another. She had money, connections, luxurious material things, and wanted all of us to be just as fancy as her. Of mother's teacher friends, I believe I took after her ways more than the others. I still aspire to be the most fancy and have accidentally raised 2 fancy daughters along the way. To this day, when any of us are dressed to the nines, I can't help but think of Mrs. Shivers, as she would have been so proud. India. Mr. and Mrs. Preston C. Bell were the principal teacher power couple of Shivers Junior High School. They lived in the most modern home in Aberdeen, which in my small world rivaled the Brady Bunch house. Mother and India Walker Bell were the very best of friends. Even after spending the day teaching together in the same building, they talked on the phone every night for hours. When I was a teenager with no call waiting, this endless busy signal frustrated me beyond belief. We visited the Bells' home frequently, as it was only a few blocks away. Mid-century modern furniture furnished the den, yet the formal rooms were filled with highly polished antique reproductions by Ethan Allen. Each visit, I couldn't resist inspecting the roll-top writing desk with pigeonholes and tiny drawers. When my sister and I would get too rowdy, Mrs. Bell told us we were acting like urchins, and Mother would send us outside. Mother and India were the spirit keepers of school and were always planning something to keep teachers and students happy and motivated. They also didn't mind stirring up trouble with pranks and silliness. As principal of Shivers Junior High School, Mr. Bell did not take part in any of the shenanigans between the two. While kind, gentle, and always smiling, Preston Charles Bell, a United Methodist Church minister, did not suffer fools. Though born to African American parents, India was extremely Caucasian in appearance. Her skin was more pale than mine. Her hair looked exactly like my mom's, only gray. Mrs. Bell was the only one of her many siblings who looked white. If you didn't know her, you wouldn't know that she was a person of color. Because Mr. Bell was brown and Miss Bell looked white, their appearance together sometimes angered or confused those who didn't know them. Many delivery men left the school with red faces after using the N-word in front of Miss Bell. Those who referenced the black principal of the school in such terms retreated quickly upon finding out he was her husband. She infamously let them dig a deep grave before allowing him to fall into it. I imagine that outsiders like sales representatives and delivery men made assumptions, remarks, and comments that Mrs. Bell heard and felt. It makes me wonder if that is why they never had children, and sad that they never got to know my youngest daughter, Elena Bell. As I currently collect oral histories from African Americans of this same generation, their stories of integration and desegregation remind me of these three women. Just like the people I interview, the women that influenced my mother as a young teacher overcame obstacles that I will never understand. Her mentors, friends, and parental figures became educated and sophisticated in a world that handed them nothing. My children and I will never experience the injustices of their lives. Yet for some reason we will never know, Ida Mae, Minnie, and India took Mother in and treated her as a friend. They spoiled me and my sister like we were their own grandchildren. Our differences in race were never mentioned, and I barely even noticed until they were gone. The workplace friendships that started in 1970 carry on in many ways today. As I followed my mom into the profession of education, my 27 years of teaching were filled with the same types of close friendships that are made from being bound together 10 plus hours a day, 180 days a year. Lifting one another up and encouraging each one to be as fabulous as Miss Shivers is a given in all of our friendships. I spent 27 years stirring up trouble and keeping the spirit of school alive with my teacher friends, and plan to continue doing so in some form or fashion as long as I live. When Miss Ida Mae Henley became too frail to live on her own, she moved to be with her last living relatives. Her childless brother and his wife were all that remained. Several years after the three of them had passed, my mother received a letter from an attorney. The small home in Jackson, Mississippi that once belonged to Miss Henley's brother had been sold. Unbeknownst to Mother, she was named as the next of kin, and the home and its contents had been left to her. To honor the friendship of Miss Henley, the money from the sale of the house was put into savings accounts for my two young daughters. Today, one is using the money for college, and the other is saving hers for a future home. 52 years after becoming friends, and almost 20 years after her passing, Miss Ida Mae Henley is still taking care of us. Some friendships really do last forever.